Welcome to Channel 17, the Town of Colonie Government Channel.
Hello, my name's Kevin Morgan. I'm a member of the Town of Colonie Veterans Oral History Project. The goal of our project is to record the wartime experiences of our town's veterans, and today we'll be speaking with Leslie Warner, a resident of the Town of Colonie for 7 years. Today is Wednesday, October 24th, 2007, and we're filming at the Town of Colonie's William K. Sanford Library. Welcome, Mr. Warner, and thank you for participating in our program.
My pleasure.
I'd like to start just by having you, if you would, state your full name.
Leslie A. Warner.
And date of birth, sir?
4/3/17.
Okay, thank you. Well, we'll start. I understand you were in the Army. We have some information on you, but I'd like really to have you tell me, if we can start by telling us how you got involved.
Well, I got involved with the Selective Service Lottery of 1940 when they decided they needed more manpower in the services for a year. And the first 3 or 4 months, they had enough volunteers because we were just coming out of the Depression and a lot of young fellows didn't have any work to do. So by the time they had the volunteers signed up, it was June 41, and my number came up.
And let me ask you, was every eligible young man at the age of 18 required to sign up for the Selective
18 to
Service?
30 at that time. And my number came up first with 5 other gentlemen from my hometown, and we were put in service at Fort Devens, Massachusetts.
Your hometown, if you would. Tell me where that was.
New Britain, Connecticut.
New Britain, Connecticut. What was your attitude toward the time, or the feeling at the time? Was the smell of war in the air?
I had never given it much thought. I was happy with what I was doing, and it was quite a shock to get drafted, as we call it nowadays. But I had nothing.
Had you finished high school?
Yes, I graduated from high school.
Were you employed?
I was employed by the Woolworth Corporation, and I guess October 35, well, I worked 6 years before I got called, so.
Okay, so where did the Army take you first?
Went to Fort Devens, Massachusetts for 2 weeks for tests of all kind, IQ tests.
Aptitude tests? Physical fitness tests?
And they outfitted us with World War I uniforms, which was all they had at the time. And then we went to, myself and 4 other gentlemen went to Fort Bragg, North Carolina for artillery. And the rest of the group that was in that particular fort went to some fort in Georgia for infantry training. So I was quite fortunate to go to the artillery instead of infantry.
Is that how you viewed it at the time?
Yep. So then from that we had 3 months of basic training at Fort Bragg. And then we were assigned to different outfits, and I ended up in Watertown, New York with what they call Madison Barracks. Was an old Army camp from years and years. I guess it must have been there in the Civil War because it was a beautiful old park. And I joined the 258 Field Artillery Regiment that was in New York City National Guard outfit that got pulled into service a couple of months before. So I joined that 258. And we trained on 155 howitzers. And eventually, the colonel put me in for officers training, and I went to Fort Sill, Oklahoma for 3 months for officers training and graduated as second lieutenant.
At what point did Pearl Harbor occur?
Well, Pearl Harbor occurred in December of 41.
At what point in your training, where were you?
At that time, I was at Madison Barracks, New York, with this artillery outfit. And as soon as I was home at New Britain on a weekend leave, and the radio announced that we had to get back to camp right away because the war was declared. And I got back to camp, and we loaded on trucks, and nobody knew where we were going, but we were told by the first sergeant to load our duffel bags with plenty of clothing and be ready for anything. We had World War I rifles because we had no modern equipment. And we got on the trucks and headed west, and I said, gee, I wonder where we're going. We ended up in Buffalo, New York to guard the bridges and industries because they were afraid a German submarine might come up the Great Lakes and shoot us. But all we had was, as I say, World War I rifles, so we couldn't do much damage anyway.
So the shock, the announcement of Pearl Harbor really set a lot of things in motion.
Yeah. So then we went from there, we stayed there till after Christmas. And then we went back to Watertown, New York, to our regular base and got back into training. And we started getting all this new equipment, like helmets and that. Instead of World War I helmets, we were issued these new ones. And we trained and trained and trained until the colonel decided I better go to OCS.
What was your particular training? What did it involve for you in the artillery?
Well, they made me a member of the communication staff. At the time I joined them, all we had was a telephone, portable telephone. So my job was to learn how to climb telephone poles and string telephone wire from gun to gun and from gun to headquarters.
So you could link and coordinate the artillery?
With the portable phones. And then eventually, within 6-7 months, we got handheld radios that somebody came up with. So we had the radios then. So when I went to officer school, that's the only training I had in the artillery was those two things. I didn't have anything to do with the guns. So at the officer school, the third week was a killer because they all kind of test on higher math and things like that, which I had never had in my life. So it was a little extra work to learn all that stuff and graduated as a second lieutenant. And that was at Fort Sill, Oklahoma. Then I got transferred back from there to Fort Bragg, North Carolina to go through a replacement center to where you were going to be assigned. And I ended up being assigned to Camp McCoy, Wisconsin to form an artillery battalion of brand new kids off the street. And that was our job. So the first week we had all new officers. We had 4 officers from Hawaii come back, and they were going to be the commanding group. And we had probably 10 or 12 first lieutenants from different ROTC outfits as a second group. Then they had, I think, must have been about 15 of us second lieutenants just got out of school up there too. So one week we had just for orientation. The second week we got non-coms from all the different outfits, artillery outfits, to build this organization. Then the third week we got 515 draftees from Indiana, Illinois, and Kentucky to train and make an artillery battalion out of it. And that put us right through that summer.
How did news of the war reach you? I mean, radio, newspaper?
Well, I was home with my gal friend, and it came in on the radio. We were having dinner at her sister's house, and it came in on the radio.
Was it a total shock to you?
Yep. Well, I wasn't paying much attention to world things at that time, so, but it was quite a shock to get that at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and try to get back to camp.
Now, initially, of course, our country took some serious defeats.
Yep.
And the European situation wasn't good.
Wasn't good at all.
So what was your feeling as you were going through your training?
Well, I figured we were going to be in trouble before long. So, sure enough, December was the first of it. And then the rest of the stories coming from Europe and Japan was horrible. So I figured we were going to get in deep pretty soon.
At what point did you go overseas? What time, what month and year?
I went overseas in July on the Queen Elizabeth. We were the only organization on the ship, so we were made MPs. and we had 16,000 replacements on that ship, believe it or not.
16,000 all on one boat.
And only one lifesaver. But they were very good. The English were very good. The boat got us over there in 4.5 days. We zigzagged all over the place and got there in 4.5 days because they were afraid of submarines, of course, and no submarine could catch us. So we
And were
got.
they strict about not allowing you to, any lights, or I've heard stories, you couldn't light a cigarette on deck?
We had to be downstairs if you wanted a cigarette or a cigar, and the ship was cordoned off into a red, white, and blue section, and we had to keep the guys in their own section so we wouldn't have too much of a run around, and it was quite an experience.
Were there any incidents that occurred on the ship?
And we had 2 meals a day because the crowd was so big. I think we ate breakfast probably from 8 o'clock in the morning till noontime, and then that was it until dinner time, and then the dinner was from 4 o'clock till about 6 or 7 at night to get through those 16,000 people. Very simple
What were the
meals.
sleeping arrangements like?
They were all over the place. I went down into the lower part of the ship, and even the swimming pools had bunks lined up on top of them.
They had stripped
And
it
they
of
were
all of its luxury appointments and had...
4 or 5 bunks high. Every ounce of the place was filled with bunks.
What was the atmosphere? What was the feeling on ship?
Everybody was happy. They weren't too sad about anything.
On a great adventure, it seemed?
The only thing that happened, we had one incident when I heard this argument on the deck, and I ran up to see what was going on and grabbed my 2 sergeants, and these 2 kids were raising a boy up in the air, and you're going to throw him overboard. He was playing with crooked dice. He had dollar bills hanging over him, and these kids were going to throw him overboard. So I took my pistol out and I shot one shot in the air and scared the kids, and they dropped the kid real quick. And I took the boy down to the, what they call it, the brig in the front of the ship, and said, "You're going to get in there and stay in there until we get to Scotland. We're going to land in Scotland." He says, "Don't let me out." I said, "I'm not going to let you out at all."
For his own safety.
So,
So you disembarked in Scotland?
Greenock, Scotland, yeah.
Take us from there.
And then from there, we loaded on trains and went down to the lower part of England called Land's End. And that's where we were going to do our training in England. Oof. And we had to go back and forth to Manchester to get all these guns, because we didn't have them in the States. And at the time we get back to the States for a couple of minutes, we were assigned to we were a 105 millimeter howitzer outfit, and originally that's what we started out as. Then they transferred us to Fort Bragg and made us a 240 millimeter howitzer, and they only had one howitzer manufactured up to that date. So we all trained on that one howitzer till we got to England, and when we got to England, we had to go to Manchester area, Liverpool area, where the freighters were, and they were unloading our guns and tractors. The tractors were made over there too. And they were 38-ton tractors with a 21-inch track. And it burned 1 gallon of gas to move it 1 mile. And so we had to train on those tractors, and then the guns we pulled with those tractors down through England, and it was some job because the English roads were all narrow, and we really upset the British going through some of the towns that we had to go through from the northern part of England to the southern part of England. But we finally got all 6 guns to Land's End and set them up so the kids could learn how to handle themselves with these guns and how to use them.
Where were the guns manufactured?
In the States, and they were shipped over.
They were shipped over. But the tractors,
The tractors were mostly made in England.
Made in
And they had Rolls-Royce engines in them, and most of them were made there. So we had to have another session of schooling on that. And some of these kids that were from Indiana Oh, just loved it. They saw that tractor and they went wild. And you can imagine this tractor had 2 seats in it that were wide enough for 8 men on each seat, which was a gun crew, 16 men to a gun crew. So these kids really
How did you get along with the English?
had nothing to do with them.
No?
The only experience we had with them was when unloading the ship. And one of my guys made a comment about it. At 2 o'clock, the whistle blew, and it was tea time. And there's one of our guns hanging up in the air off the ship. And the guy says, "You going to let that down on the ground?" He says, "No, it's all right up there. Nobody's going to hurt it." So he went about having his tea until he got through with tea before he let it down.
A little different way of doing business.
So that's the only experience we had with them. We
So you didn't really get out to experience the English countryside?
No.
Or
We didn't
it was,
have
all,
time.
it
We
was
didn't have
mostly
time to-
all business?
Didn't have time for any leaves at all. We didn't have any leaves at all.
How long had it been since you'd seen your folks and been home?
Let's see now. Where was I when I...
An extended period of time,
It
I
was
have to imagine.
quite a while. I can't remember now.
How did you keep in touch with them? Were you able to write letters?
Write letters, yeah. Until I got out of officer school, then I had a week off, and I was able to go up there.
Mm-hmm.
And then from Madison Barracks, we used to go weekends and on a train, but after that, it was a lost cause because I ended up in Camp McCoy, Wisconsin, Fort Sill, Oklahoma for another month of training. So I was gone probably a year before I got back again to Connecticut. So it's quite an experience. We went to pick the wheat, so we got stalled up there for a couple of months.
And when you say pick the wheat, I know we talked about it earlier, but can you tell us about that? That's when you were stateside prior to being shipped over.
Yeah, that was an emergency. The farmers were yelling for help, so they sent 4,000 troops up there, and the boys had to shuck the wheat, what they call shucking the wheat, put it up in a little
And where was this?
Plant.
What state was this?
North Dakota.
In North Dakota.
And we did this for 2.5 months, I guess, before it got real cold, and we had finished the job anyway. Then we went back to Camp McCoy, Wisconsin. We were only there for probably 2 weeks. We got orders to go to Fort Riley, Kansas. And we were going to use our 105s and fire live ammunition over training tanks. We had to fire in front of them, see if we could scare them without killing them. So we stayed at Fort Riley for 3 months. Then we got orders to go to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, to convert to the 240 howitzer outfit before we went overseas.
Mm-hmm.
So we got a little...
All in all, your training you felt was adequate?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we passed all our Army tests, and flying colors. These kids did a wonderful job. And they were, as I say, they were all young, 18, 20 years old, 21 years old. And it was amazing how well they did it.
From England, let's pick up in England again. Where did you go next?
From England, we went across the channel on Navy ships because our guns were so big, the landing craft had to take one at a time.
So the Normandy Invasion had taken place in
The Normandy
June.
Invasion had taken place in June, and this was in July. We landed on Utah Beach. And there was still a contingent of Germans at the Cherbourg Peninsula. They were surrounded by our troops and couldn't get away anyway. And we landed there, and we went south to open field, and we stayed there for probably a week, and they assigned us to General Patton's Army. So after we got that assignment, we got ready to move, and off we went.
That was the Patton's Third Army?
Yep. We went across France, fighting our way, and we were making a lot of progress because we were south of the main battle lines. So we got all the way over to below Paris with not too much trouble. And
What period of time to cover that distance?
well, that took a little longer than, because the Filet Gap was surrounded by Americans, and we had all Germans in that
The fillet's pocket?
fillet pocket. So it probably took another month.
Were they able to keep your
To get
supplies? Were your supplies gasoline,
We
ammunition, food?
We ran
keep
out
up
of
with you?
supplies and gas right outside of Paris. For 3 days, we ran out of gas and fuel. And tires, we had a lot of trouble with tires.
How many 240 millimeter cannons did you bring with you?
Well, our battalion had 6, 2 to each battery. And I don't know if you realize it, but 240 howitzer is a gun that fires a shell that's 3 foot tall, 11 inches in diameter, and it will fire at 16 miles with an 88-pound bag of gunpowder. So we had a lot of heavy equipment.
Was that the heaviest
Land gun,
we had?
mobile land gun that we had, yes. So we we did that till we got our supplies back again. Then we went on to Metz, just below Metz, and we were stuck there for a month and a half because the city of Metz was ringed by forts from the old Maginot Line that the French had built from Belgium to Switzerland after World War I, because the Germans were always trying to get into more territory.
What instances did you bring those big guns to bear? Where was the first time you used them?
We used them at the Fillet Gap, and there's quite a bit of transportation in there that we had to wreck, so we did. And got most of the German mobile forces were completely wrecked.
Now those guns would be positioned behind the front lines.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
If you say they fired 16
We didn't have any such thing as front lines in that war, except in the Battle of the Bulge was the only place we actually had a stalemate.
How did you bring those guns to bear? How would you sight them in? How would you know where your targets were?
That's what I did. As General Patton says, you point them at the Germans and shoot them.
That's simple for
But,
him.
and my job was to go up and see how far away we were from the troops and the Germans, and making a decision there. Then we put the guns in the field.
When you say go up, can you tell us more about that?
Well, as I go up my Piper Cub with my pilot, and we'd check all that stuff out as to where we would be safe to get our guns into firing position.
Were you protected at all in that Piper Cub?
No. Just
You didn't
me-
have a fighter escort?
Just me and my pilot. And
At low altitude?
Well, we usually flew at 1,000 feet if we could, depending on the situation, because the Germans had a little fun with us at first, shooting their rifles at us, but we were always out of range of the rifles. But once in a while, matter of fact, one of my friends got hit by a mortar shell. He was about 2 miles ahead of me in his plane, and they were too low, actually, and a mortar shell, which lobs the shells, hit the plane. And of course, the minute it hit the plane burst into flames, because all it is a canvas-covered plane. That's all it is. And they went right down like a lock. And that's how most of it was done. We had myself as a recon officer too. So in weather that was bad and I couldn't fly, I was always up front, checking this and checking that, and checking the best route.
So you visually saw the enemy?
Yeah.
Photograph
Yep.
things, send information back,
Yep.
and then the guns would fire.
And the colonel would make up his mind where he wanted to go, and we'd put that gun right where he wanted it.
And would you fly over afterward to see how effective the
Oh,
firing
yeah.
was?
Yeah, we were always out looking for trouble.
And how efficient was how accurate was the fire?
Yep. Well, our guns were very, very accurate because we had a terrific fire direction, what they call a fire direction center, where these troops had information on everything from the weather to what type gun the German was using, how far the 88 would go and so forth and so on. And the fire direction center would send back the data to me when I was flying, and I'd do what they told me to do, and sure enough, I'd be probably 50 yards over or 50 yards short, and we could adjust it real quick.
So you would be in the air when the guns were firing
Oh, yeah.
to compensate and
Yep.
correct?
Yep.
So you could see immediately the result.
Right.
What was your feelings when the first time you saw the damage that those guns would cause?
I was amazed that we could be so accurate. And it was really something.
And effective.
Yep.
Did you feel at that time you had the Germans on the run?
No, because I knew we didn't at that time.
This was in July, August, September of '44?
Last month of September. Yeah.
So the feeling was still that the Germans' war capability was
so we couldn't get across the Rhine River for a couple of months, so it was quite an experience trying to get there. But we were bottlenecked a couple of times, and as I say, at Metz, then we had to cross the Moselle River. We were going south to the southern part of Germany. We had to cross the Moselle River, and the Germans wouldn't allow us to build a pontoon bridge because they were opening these forts that surrounded the two cities, Metz and Nancy. And they had disappearing guns in these turrets under 21, I think it was 21 inches of concrete, reinforced concrete turrets, and the turrets popped up with a 88. And the minute the engineers put the pontoons in the river, the Germans would shoot it out. And they used everything. They used smoke to hide the things, but we just couldn't.
Ultimately, how did they cross?
We went south about 10 miles and made it across.
On a bridge that we had to construct, the American Army had to construct.
Army engineers. Yep. Matter of fact, there's a picture in that book of me going across the pontoon bridge with the tractor, because the engineer that was in charge of it told me I couldn't go across. I said, well, you call Third Army, and Third Army told me to go across. He said, but you can't take all that equipment with you, it's too big. So I had to unhook all the guns and take one piece over at a time. And going across, the driver and I were the only two people on the tractor, and the water was right up to our waist, because these tractors were all waterproofed. And 38 tons just went. And I said,
you compressed the pontoon bridge they made, or were you on the river bottom?
We were on the pontoons in the track, but we just sunk in the middle of the river.
Because the extreme weight pushed it down.
But it didn't break. And it took us something like 24 hours to get my 6 guns and all the equipment across that river. And then we had orders to cross the Rhine River, probably 20 miles below that, at what the heck was the name of that town? Anyway, we got there, and the colonel said, you guys be ready to go across at 4 o'clock in the morning. I said, what are we going to go across on? When we got down there, there's the Navy with some landing ships. I said, how the heck did those kids get that landing ship all the way from the Atlantic Ocean to the Rhine River? Well, I couldn't find out. Nobody would tell me. But we went across the Rhine River on Navy ship.
On a Navy ship. How fascinating.
So we got on the other side, then we got a little clear sailing, and we went right through all the southern part of, till the Battle of the Bulge, and General Eisenhower called General Patton, says, you'll be here in 24 hours, and we're down south, and Bastogne in Belgium is up here. You know, we had quite a time.
When you refer to the Battle of the Bulge, the Ardennes,
the Ardennes
offensive
that
the Germans launched in December of '44.
Yep. And we had to go from southern part of France down to Frankfurt area, and make it all the way up through Luxembourg into Belgium to help. So we did.
So you had to disengage from one sector and move to another.
Yep. The whole army, the whole Third Army went up to the Battle of the Bulge. And we were on the southern part of it when they broke through and rescued the kids that were in
Bastogne.
Yep.
Did your guns come to play in that?
We didn't use them, no. Not there, no. We didn't have to.
The battlefield moved too quickly, too fluidly.
It was too fast. And it was too condensed.
Now, General Patton got a reputation as quite a flamboyant general in his service. Did you ever happen to see him in action?
Yes, I had the unfortunate case of three cases of meeting him, and I'm just trying to remember now. The first time was before we crossed the Rhine. We were told to go up to a certain place and put the guns in position. I went in, and I was in mud up to my knees, and I said, I'm not going to put these 240s in that field because we'd never get them out of there. So it just so happened that General Patton's crew, he had 2 jeeps in front of him and 2 in back of himself. They come up, what do you think you're doing? And I told them that we're supposed to be in this field, but I don't think we should go in there because we'd have trouble getting out. If anything happened, we had to get out fast, we'd never do it. So he looked the situation over, and looked me over, and he said, okay, he says, you got my permission to leave it right in the road until I call you back again. So he called back the outfit to the headquarters of my colonel. Sure enough, we moved again for 10 miles. And I forgot all about it. We cleaned up and got back to where we were supposed to go. And then we got to the Battle of Bulge. He declared this one road one way north and not to block it at any cost. It was to be open just for the gas trucks and fuel and other supplies. And it was snowing quite hard, and I was able to get the 5 guns into this one field, and the 6th gun got stuck with the barrel sticking out in the road about 6-7 foot. And just about the time I'm cussing the gun out, General Patton comes along again with his convoy. He says, you again? I said, yes, sir. He said, what's the matter? I said, well, this thing is stuck, and I've got a 4-ton truck trying to pull the 38-ton tractor and the gun together, and we just can't get it. It keeps slipping and sliding. And he looked at me and said, well, Lieutenant, I suggest you go buy a hacksaw and saw the damn thing off until I get back here. So I said, yes, sir. And off he went. He smiled and he sort of winked at me, and off he went. Then my third experience with the general was at the tail end of the war. I flew over to his headquarters, which was quite a distance away from us, with some papers and orders. And just as I started back out, I see this young fellow stuck on the side of the road in mud with a telephone truck from the communication corps. And I'm trying to help him get out of there, and I finally said, well, you just sit right here, son, and I'll go back to General Patton's headquarters there, and I'll get somebody to pull you out of there. So just then General Patton shows up, and he looks at me again and said, well, Lieutenant, we meet again. I said, yes, we do, sir. And
Were you impressed the fact that he remembered you?
yeah, he had quite a memory. He had quite a memory. And he said, well, what are you doing here? I said, well, I'm trying to get help for this young man. Then he cussed the kid out. I dragged you 3,000 miles across the ocean, and you stick that piece of equipment with his usual words. And I said, well, I called back and got somebody coming with a tow truck. He said, all right. Off he went.
Was he respected? I mean, from a soldier's point of view, what was your opinion of him?
I think he was. I think he was, honestly. Some of them thought he was kind of blunt and rough, but he believed in doing what he had to do and in doing it with as less trouble as he could and loss of life that he could. So, but I thought he was a fair man myself.
As you pushed across, France and you said Luxembourg or Belgium.
Well, that was up toward the Bulge. You had to go through Luxembourg. And
where would you be billeted at night? Where did you stay?
Wherever we could. Yeah.
How did you usually go about that?
Well, we usually found vacant homes or things like that, hotels that were vacated while the war was going on. We just built down there.
Your food supplies kept up with you?
Yeah. Yeah, we always had rations, yep.
How did you feel your officers were?
The ones I worked with were very good. We were all trained and
knew their jobs, and
the personalities were all good. No real factions at all. So we had a good outfit, very good outfit. And I didn't bump into any bad ones at all.
So good morale?
Yep. Oh, yeah.
You felt your equipment good, your leadership was good?
Yep. Everything was fine.
At what point did you think you had the war was going our way?
As soon as the Battle of Bulge ended, I knew we were
On to victory?
Yep. Yep. And we knew the Russians were coming in from the east, so they were almost in Berlin by the time we got through the Battle of Bulge.
How did news move through the military at that time? I mean, how, as you were, at war, how did you find information out? Was it word of mouth, or did we have a good
Information about what?
just in general, how the war was progressing? News from back home?
No, very little of that. Most of it was word to word about what we were doing.
Yeah. Did you have much interaction with the infantry?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So you could get a feel for how things were going through them, I suppose?
You know, a couple of, as I say, in bad weather, I was always up front with the infantry as an observation.
No, you said that's
as
right.
a-
In the Piper Cub, how many flights did you take in your career with the military for an observation?
Oh, it must have been about 200. We lost track after 150. I got air medals for 150 flights.
Air medals. What did you receive for that?
Well, the Army didn't give us air medals. The Air Force did, but we had to fly 50 missions to get one air medal, and then we got them.
Did you ever have any close calls when you were in the air?
Yeah, a couple of times.
Can you tell us about those?
Well, there was not much to tell about it. And we got shot at by our P-47s on New Year's Day, 45. We were up in the air, and I see two tracer bullets go by me. I said, where are they coming from? And I turned my head because we didn't have any back window in a Piper Cub. You just had to wait to see from either side. All of a sudden, I see this P-47 go by me, and I said, that damn fool's shooting at us. He doesn't know what we look like, because our ships all had black and white stripes on them, so they could recognize that it was part of our Army. And these two kids, we found out, I took their number as soon as I saw the plane fly by me. I copied down their number. There's two of them. And
The term we call friendly fire today.
they had just come over from the States the week before, and the kids were lost just like we were in all this snow. But they took it. I don't know why they fired at us, but as I say, we had black and white stripes on the tail, which indicated we were Americans. And then another day, it was during November, I guess it was. It was a lousy day. And it was, General Patton had called to see if we could get up in the air because he was being shelled. His headquarters was in Nancy, the city of Nancy. And they were shelling Nancy, and he was afraid his headquarters was going to get it with a large caliber gun. So he asked for volunteers, and my pilot, he was a great one for volunteering for everything.
What was his name?
John Garrels. He was a farm boy from Illinois. And he learned how to fly when he was 14 years old with the crop duster. His father had a huge farm out in Illinois. And what was I going to say?
Patton's command was under threat of being shelled in Nancy.
Yeah. And they asked for a flight to go up and see if they could find out where this gun was coming from. So we got up there, and it was very bad. It was misting, and we were afraid it was going to ice up on us, but I kept going back and forth. And I noticed I looked on my map, actually, and noticed a railroad coming out of a tunnel. And I said, I bet that has something to do with it. So I'm looking at my map and watching it, and I said, Ace, just keep going back and forth quite a distance away from there. I don't want anybody to see us, because, as I say, it was soupy and the bad visibility from the ground. And sure enough, all of a sudden the tunnel opens up, and out comes this huge railroad gun. I said, oh boy, I said, there it is. So I called back to my fire direction center. I said, get ready for action. I'm going to give you some coordinates from this road map. That's all I have is a road map. I'll give you the directions from the road map I have, and I know you have one too. So you be ready to fire one shot, so I'll know where I'm at, and be prepared the other 5 guns to back it up. So sure enough, that gun came out, and I called back to Fire Direction Center and said, this is where I want it. Fire one gun. So they fired one gun, and it landed between the gun and the tunnel. I said, well, that's pretty good. I said, short? No. Over. Give me 50 short. Sure enough, I had all 5 guns fired. We destroyed that.
Took it out.
Took it right off the tracks. So I said, Ace, get out of here real quick. I said, this is going to ice up on us because the windshield was getting fogged over with the little pellets. So we got down as far as we could safely so it wouldn't freeze. And that's, we lost, I think we lost about 6 inches out of our wing from something hit us. And
you must have celebrated pretty good on that one.
We enjoyed that when we got back.
I bet.
General Patton called and congratulated us. So it was pretty good. But it's quite an experience. It's quite a life experience.
That sounds it. That sounds it.
Yeah.
Well, all right. At this point, the Battle of the Bulge.
Mm-hmm.
After that occurred, you felt the Germans were...
We felt we had them licked.
Yeah.
And we went back to our original position. We had to go back down south again to where we were originally because Bastogne was in the 1st Army and 7th Army was in between us, and we were down south. So then we took off and went down through Bavaria to Hitler's hideaway and right over to the Austrian border.
Had that portion of Germany seen much of the war?
Not too much, no.
So it was still intact?
Yeah, it was pretty good.
What were your impressions of that area?
I liked it very much. It was very impressive countryside. Matter of fact, in one place, I can't remember the name of the town, near Wurzburg, I took, at this time, they gave us, we recon officers had about a 10-mile square of small towns we had to visit to make sure there were no German soldiers around, because most of them were throwing their guns away and walking home. And so I got to this one town and talked to the Burgermeister, or whatever they called him in those days. He was the mayor. And he said, okay, he said, I'll do what you say. I'll take all the guns and all the ammunition from the soldiers when they come back here and report into me.
Did you have an interpreter, or did you pick up the German language?
No, I had a Jewish boy. It was my survey sergeant. He was very, very fluent. So we talked to this guy, and he owned what we call a PX. It's a store like for supplies and candy and all that. And we went over to his store, and I said, now this store is going to be locked because it's American property now. And I looked over the whole store, and down in the basement I found 8 wooden cases. And I said, that's funny, what's in those things? And I asked him, he said, oh, it's just supplies. So I said, okay. So I said, I'll be back in 24 hours and everything better be locked up. And got to the store and everything's out, all gone. And I said, that's funny, now what happened to that? He said, I don't know, he says. Somebody broke in and took it all. I said, oh, now come on now, whatever your name is. I went to his house, and there all the stuff is in his house. So I had the boys load the 8 wooden cases up into the 2.5-ton truck we had with us. It turned out that they were full of bottles of wine and liquor. They were all stored in, I think there was 40 bottles to a case.
That became U.S. property?
That became U.S. property. It became a party at the end of the war. So that's what we did, and then by that time the Army under General Eisenhower felt that we were getting command and we didn't need 240 howitzers anymore, so you guys put the howitzers away and you do these little jobs like they're telling you to until I call you to go back to France with the guns. So another job I had was to go through these towns and this other town I found, there was a prisoner of war camp with British and American officers. And the guy that runs the town, he said, I didn't know that was there.
Was it still under German control, or they had left at that point?
Most of them had left. All the army had left. And I walk into this big building, and there's two German colonels sitting there. They must have been about 70 years old. So I told them what was going to happen. I took their swords away from them. I took their daggers away from them and their guns. And I said, you can do what you want to do. And the guy said, aren't you going to give me a ride? I said, no, I'm not going to give you a ride. I don't have room for you to give you a ride. He wanted to ride back to where he lived. I don't know where he lived, but he wanted to ride. I said, nope, you're on your own.
Did you find it humorous or arrogant, or what did you?
They were just, they didn't give a darn.
They were tired.
They were tired, wanted to go home. And then it turned out that this place had, I think we had 50 American and British officers that were prisoners of war, all malnutrition. Some of them couldn't even stand up. So I called back to the headquarters and got the medical corps to send some ambulances down and pick these kids up, or these officers up. But that was my job now that we stopped shooting the guns. And I was doing things like that until we got to the Austrian border, and General Patton got requested to get the Lipizania stallions out of the Russian hands. So
I've heard a little bit about that story. What can you tell us about that?
As I say, he was a friend of a Duke from World War I. And this Duke and he remained friends all through the years. And they had another Duke in Germany that was part of their friendship. The three of them were close friends. And this one man, over the years, he developed the Lipizania Riding Academy with these horses.
And it was located where?
In Austria.
In Austria.
Vienna. And these horses, I don't know if you ever heard of them, but they took their orders from the rider's knee muscles and muscles in his leg. And the horses never had a hand muscle at all, or a hand whistle. But they took all their orders from muscle movement. And they put on all kinds of shows. They were beautiful, beautiful animals. And the Duke was afraid the Russians were going to slaughter them for food, which they did a lot of. So Duke asked the general if he could possibly rescue them. He had 80 or 100 of them right on the border line between Czechoslovakia and Austria. So General Patton says, certainly, he said, no doubt about it, he's going to help you. So he got together, I think there was about 400 GIs. I had 40 of them because my boys were all cowboys and farmers. So I said, okay, we'll volunteer 40 guys and 2 trucks. So
this was a volunteer mission?
Yeah.
Did you understand what it was about at the time?
Oh, yeah. They told us exactly. We had they sent one combat outfit with us of specialists.
So wait, excuse me, when would this have been? What time of year?
Let's see, the war ended in May. It was probably March or April of 45.
Okay.
And we herded these animals all the way back to the German Luke's castle. He had quite a place. So I think we had about 100 horses. And we
loaded them all onto American trucks?
No, drove them.
Oh, drove them like a cattle drive, like a horse drive?
Horseman, yeah.
For goodness sake.
Across the lower part of Germany and into the German castle. He had a big barn.
What did you think of that whole?
It was quite a game. To me, it was fun watching all these horses go by. And the kids really enjoyed it. My kids really enjoyed it. Some of them rode them, got on top of them and rode. Of course, they didn't know what to do with them, but the horses kept going right along with the crowd. So we did that for...
Did you feel you were contributing to something at the time?
I did, yeah.
You recognize the importance of saving these animals?
Fact, when I first got transferred to Albany, that was the first thing I did was go see a show. They had a show over at Troy in the armory from the Lipizania stallions, the real horses. So I took my wife and kids to see the Lipizanas that we saved.
Let me touch back on the prisoner of war camp. You say the care for the American and British servicemen that were there, was it poor, or was it
It
were
was
they
poor.
mistreated, or was it
They weren't
just
mistreated, but they were
the situation?
They weren't fed properly, and malnutrition was terrible.
So your outfit more or less liberated that camp
Yeah. Well, there was nothing to liberate.
at that point?
They'd all gone away except the two colonels, and they were too old to do anything.
Yeah.
So that was the experience we had at the end of the war.
The damage, the destruction, the death.
We did a lot of that.
How did you take those things as you
Well, I
were
was
constantly exposed to it?
I was quite shocked about the whole thing, why we did such a thing, but it's all part of the game. See some of the damage we did with our guns and bombs. To see this whole city liberated, and some of these beautiful old buildings they had. Some of the railroad stations were real beautiful for railroad stations, all shattered to pieces. It was quite an experience. But we got through it all. We put our guns back into France to the Ordnance Department, and then they decided we'd help out guarding this huge prisoner of war camp at Meilly-le-Camp, they called it, in France. So that's where I spent my remaining days. The war ended in May.
Where were you when the war ended? How did news reach you?
Oh, word of mouth. We were in Meilly-le-Camp, and right after that, they started breaking up the outfits, and everybody wanted to go home, of course. Everybody had points, and they wanted to go home. So it had to be done very, very systematically, and the one with the highest points were going first, and they were all shipped home. And
Now, you were responsible for a number of men. Did you have any problems keeping discipline once the threat of war was over?
no. Matter of fact, the day war ended, the next day I told the kids that the officers and the non-coms are going to cook a meal for them. We had my Jeep driver, he was a great one for getting things that he shouldn't get. He had a case of coffee in the back of my Jeep, and he had a case of fruit salads. And then I had all that liquor, and we rigged up a whole bunch of food. I don't know where we got it from. But one of the sergeants got a whole bunch of food for us, and we made lunch for them, and the sergeants were the KPs, and we officers served the food, and I opened all the bottles, and we had a great old time.
Now, I'm interested when you refer to the men in the group, you call them kids. How old were you? How old were you, and how old were they?
Well, I was
The average age.
about 27 at that time.
So you were
And
considered.
they were about 20, 21. So, but that's what we did on the last day. Got everybody drunk, or almost drunk. Even had a Catholic chaplain stop by, and he had 2 or 3 drinks and thought it was a grand old idea. But that
Were religious days observed?
No. You just get a visit if you want it one.
Did
Or
many of the men participate
Oh
in
yeah, I was amazed.
church services,
Yeah, I was amazed at how many were always going to church service
even amidst the fact that you're
Yeah.
in combat?
as soon as they found time to do it. Well organized, yep. General Patton made sure of all that stuff. Keep the morale up.
How did you consider the German citizenry that you ran into when the war ended? How were they toward you?
I never ran into any of them.
You didn't.
No. The only place at Wurzburg we were billeted in a hotel, and there was a German orchestra there, and they were very nice. And then the young fellow, when we were at Meilly-le-Camp, there's a young trustee, they call him. They had been investigated to make sure they were not deep-seated Nazis or Germans. This kid was, he's probably about 30 years old, and he was a trustee. And we had him as what would you call a valet, to take care of our uniforms and shoes and make our beds and take care of the rooms we slept in. The officers we had one valet for 4 officers, and he would take care of all the housework in this particular hotel. And one day I saw him with charcoal in his hand and a piece of cardboard, and he's drawing pictures. Yeah, he showed up to me. I said, "My God, they're terrific. You do this?" And he says, "Yeah, I'm an artist." He said, "I'm not German. I'm half Austrian and half German." And he didn't like the German army. He didn't like the Nazis. And he was a trustee. So he asked me if I could sit for him. I said, "What for?" He said, "I'll make your picture." So he took the charcoal and made a picture for me. Came out pretty good.
You still have that today, do you?
No. He wanted to know if I would do him a favor and get some paint for him. I said, "Sure." I said, "Next time I go through a town, and I'll stop at a paint store and get you some artist supplies." So I did. And that's what became of that one painting you'll see in the book. It's a portrait about that big. He painted out of my pup tent. I had my pup tent, which had never been used. It was just folded up in the back of my Jeep. And I gave him my pup tent, and he painted this huge portrait of myself. And then, believe it or not, I got transferred before he finished it. I got transferred from Mila Camp down to Marseille in the lower part of France. So I don't know whatever happened to that. But I found out when I got home there the painting was. He gave it to a couple of my fellow officers, and they boxed it up.
How about that?
Sent it to my home. And in addition to that, he had made another one, the same size, with a picture of a couple of rabbits running up to a hutch on top of the hill, because he knew I just had a little baby girl born before the war ended. And he painted that, put it along with my picture. The two of them were home waiting for me when I got there.
Well, that's a nice story.
Yeah.
So after all that destruction, there was some hope.
Yeah, this kid, he ended up painting. Every time he turned around, he's painting somebody's picture, because I bought those paints for him.
So how long before you mustered out and got back to the States?
Well, that's where the Army screwed up. I don't know what for, but they sent me to Marseille to take a shuttle plane back to the States. But by the time I got to Marseille, my orders were changed again because the weather was bad over the Atlantic, South Atlantic, and they didn't want this plane flying anymore. So my orders were to stay there at Marseille for a couple of weeks until they had something for me. So this goes on, and they finally say, "Well, we can't do this, we can't do that. The artillery wanted you to go to school for a month, and that can't be done because you can't get there. So you'll have to take the first Army transport out of Marseille," which was in the month of October. So I was in Marseille from June until October doing nothing.
And you had enough points to get out at that point?
I had 158 points, which is
And
a lot
you mentioned at some point you were married at this point and had a
yeah, I was married
child?
and had a baby.
So you were anxious to get home?
And they put me on this old Army transport from World War I. It normally held 500 troops, and we had 2,000 troops on this thing. So we got outside of Gibraltar, and the ship broke down. So they had to call back and get two tugs that bring us back to Gibraltar to repair the thing. And it was only going to take 2 weeks, and it ended up taking a month to get this thing repaired. So then we would go off again toward New York, and I finally get to New York City, and this is the end of October now. And they rushed us through our discharge thing. It took about a week to get our papers all straightened out. The 1st of November, I got released in November 1945.
So just about this time,
Yep.
62 years ago.
So that's how I got out of the Army. Then I got caught. I don't know how I got caught for the Korean War, but I got called back in the Korean War, even though I was not a reserve officer. I just wanted to be around if anything happened to our country, in our country. But all of a sudden, November of 50, I get orders to go to Fort Meade, Maryland. So I tried to get out of it because November, December is the best part of the year for retail business.
When you were working at Woolworth's
And I
at
was
the
working,
time?
and they tried to get it out, but they couldn't get me out of it. So I reported to Fort Meade on November 1st and sat there for 2 weeks, and I finally went down to the artillery board at the Pentagon and asked this colonel, what's the idea? I said, you dragged me into service because you needed me. And what do you need me for? And he says, Warner, he says, just get yourself back to Fort Meade, stay there till I call you. I said, man. So I volunteered, when I got back to Fort Meade, I volunteered to take troop trains across the country to take, they were getting 25,000 draftees a month at Fort Meade. And I volunteered to take troop trains for a couple of days, and I went to Fort Hood, Texas, and Fort Ord, California, and by the end of November, I'm sitting at breakfast one morning at the restaurant, and Major sat next to me and said, we introduced ourselves, and he said, what are you here for, Lieutenant? He said, you're an artillery officer. I said, I know it, but no, the artillery don't know it, I guess, because they're stalling me for some reason. He said, well, what did you do in civilian life? I said, well, I was in the management end of the Woolworth Corporation. He looked at me and said, hey, I could use you. I said, what do you mean you could use me? He said, would you mind working for me? I said, well, I don't know what you do, so you better tell me first. So he said, well, I'm the PX officer at Fort Meade. And I said, PX officer? I said, yeah, I can work for you if you want me to, but I got to tell you, I'm an artillery officer and I'm waiting for orders. He said, don't worry about it. He says, come back tomorrow morning to my office and we'll straighten it out. So I go back in the morning, and sure enough, he's got it all straightened out. I'm assistant PX officer at Fort Meade. And they gave me a brand new Chevrolet. I was the liaison officer between Fort Meade, Fort Lewis, and Fort Holabird, and a couple other forts. And we did $600,000 a month in merchandise in that Fort Meade with all the branches we had. So I did that job until, I think it was 6 weeks before my 18 months was up. They called me in for 18 months. And it was about 6 weeks before the 18 months was up, and I get orders from the artillery board to report to Fort Sill, Oklahoma for 4 weeks for schooling, and then go to Seattle, Washington for 2 weeks for a ship to Korea. I said, what the heck are these guys doing anyway? 4 weeks in school, 2 weeks on a ship, and my time is up. They got to come back. So I take my orders to the major and told him I'm leaving. He says, you're like hell.
Did you keep in touch with any of the men that you met and had a relationship with?
Oh, yeah, we had a reunion every 2 years. After 25 years anniversary, we started having reunions every 2 years. And they were all over Indiana, California. And we always had, I would say, a good turnout.
Yeah.
Most of them were Indiana, Illinois. We had 2 or 3 reunions out there, so we had big turnouts there. But the other ones at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, Delaware, Colorado, we went to Colorado, California, and Michigan. Where else? Texas. Where the guys that lived there were the hosts for the thing, and they made up the party for us, made the reservations and hotels and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So every 2 years we would go for a weekend, 3-day weekend, and my wife and I would go to all of them and meet all the guys again. It was very nice. It ended just about 10 years ago. There are not many of us left. So I get a call from a lady out in Indiana. Her husband was one of my gun crew, and she keeps in touch with me. And
He's passed away?
no, he's very, very sick though.
Oh, he's ill, I see.
And she hears from a couple of people in Indiana. They're all passing away right and left. Yep. They got a nerve leaving the country without me.
Well, you saw a lot together.
Yep.
Well, Mr. Warner, we want to thank you for participating in our Town of Colony
Well, I
program.
hope it helped a little.
Oh, very much. You have a fascinating story,
So-
and we want to thank you for serving and thank you for participating here today.
Thank you.
Welcome to Channel 17, the Town of Colonie Government Channel.